Welcome, Jim. So this is going to be a conversation where Jim's going to do most of the talking, thank goodness. So I have a quiz for you. There was a quality guru named Edward Deming. Who's ever heard of Edward Deming? Okay, so very famous in Japan because he's helped Japan rebuild after the war. He had a statement, in God we trust, all others bring data. And when I think about Jim and Gallup, what I say is they bring data and you can believe it. And I will go on record here of saying anything Gallup puts out, you can believe is not only accurate, not biased, but based on very sound survey techniques. So Jim, I just, when Dr. Gallup gave trust of his company to you, he picked the right one because he kept his tradition up. So it's fantastic. So that will be the first plug I give to the Gallup organization. But Jim, you've got perspectives on everything. Every time I have a problem, I go to Jim, I say, I got a problem. Doesn't Gallup have some data on this? He's never said no. He's always had an answer that's been helpful. So where would you like to start today?
Well, first of all, it was worth coming here just for that. Thank you. It's such an awesome city, the history here. Deborah, you made some comments that just blows me away. And Chad yesterday, but so I started reading, Deborah, because I'm a slow student, but I was reading about Aristotle and Socrates, and of course the teacher was Plato. But these three guys, they were working on happiness. They were working on flourishing. And they were wondering about what makes a great life. And that struck me because one of the reasons I was so excited about, I'll say, acquiring Gallup was because my hero, my Aristotle, was Dr. George Gallup, who was an academic. And he built a company of some size, but he was really interested in what the will of the world is. What do people want? What makes a life worth living? But think about that. That's 2,400 years later. Here we are working on the same thing. Dr. Gallup did some political polling. We never worked for Republicans or Democrats or any special interest groups, but that wasn't what he was about. And but one of the things that we've done is that, do you have that clicker?
The turn to slides.
Deborah, I gave myself an impossible task, which was what I was thinking is that if Aristotle and Socrates and Plato were sitting right there, and they said, well, you guys, what have you learned over 2,400 years? I think this was a pretty awesome thing that we did, but I'm just showing you one country. But we built consistent sampling frames around the world in 160 countries, which gets you 98% of the population. So we went and we asked the whole world, basically, how's your life going? And I kind of felt like that was a contribution that we could make to Dr. Gallup's legacy. I got to tell you something, this was his favorite place. And he came here, Dr. Gallup did, and he taught the professors how to do sampling, how to build sampling frames, and how to form a judgment on the will of the people. And what happened here, we were talking about this, Chad, but the word for poll, all the Greeks here know this, but the word for poll is actually Gallup in this country. He left such a legacy here. But so when somebody says, hey, I need a Gallup on something, that's because our founder spent so much time here, because he felt he was continuing the pursuit of Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, people that he studied and highly admired as an academic. I'm showing you this because I didn't do it, paid for it, but didn't do it. But this is the most difficult feat ever in the history of public opinion polling. 70% of the world we did in person. So we go around, we have thousands of interviewers. But if you see, that's what scatter plot looks like. So if you do Nigeria, what most companies do, I'm not speaking competitively, I'm just telling you because they don't have the money to do it, but they'll just do like Lagos. But Lagos has nothing in common with it's like New York City, the outstate New York. They're two different planets. And so you have to have people go out in motorcycles and trains and go all over these places. It'd be like doing Saudi Arabia and doing Riyadh and Jeddah and not going out. You get the point. So we've been doing that each year with asking the question. And this we did with Kahneman and Deaton, and we all argued and we came up with a question. You can try it yourself. On a scale of 0 to 10, and these are almost exactly the words that Aristotle and Socrates and Plato were dealing with. If 10 is the best life imaginable and 0 is the worst life imaginable, where are you on that scale today? You can go ahead and pick a number yourself if you want. And the next question is, and last question on that section is, where will you be on that same scale in 5 years? We asked the whole friggin' world that question. And what we found, I'm gonna show you, but this was the hardest part of it. But if these guys were sitting here, I think their question would be, what is it that humankind wants? The most simple way I can put it is like this. They really want a good job, period, full stop. And that's women too. So if you and I were walking up and down the street and you said, what's on the mind of all of these people? That's what's on their mind. And it's really more searing than it was when I was when I was at the University of Nebraska, all I wanted was a paycheck for $20,000. I wanted to find a woman, I wanted to have 3 kids, I wanted to own my home and not have to go to war. That was our thing. Everybody well, you get the point. So I think the next question they would ask is, how you doing on that? How you doing on delivering humankind what they want? I had Deborah, one of our speakers from the National Science Foundation, Ponch. His name is so hard to say, both his first name, he just goes by Ponch. Really impressive guy. And Vint Cerf, you got a fix on Vint Cerf, the internet pioneer. But they were talking, I never heard it quite like this, but they said that all great breakthroughs begin with one question. You know what it is? Any of them, outer space or internet, or what can you measure? And see, right now we're all wondering about human development, we're wondering about flourishing, how's the world doing, and we don't have much that we can measure it with. So, Chad, I feel like I'm talking too much here, but I'm going to try to do that for you. So there's 8 billion people on Earth, 5 billion adults. And when we ask those adults, what do you want more than anything in life? 3 billion of them say, I really wish I had a good job. So if I told you how many of them have a good job, that'd get us pretty close. The answer is 1.5 billion. I'm defining good job as 30 hours per week with a paycheck for an organization, a real job. If the ILO, God bless them, their data has almost no value at all because they put in informal jobs. Are you with me? So people selling gum in traffic and all that kind of stuff. You actually are considered employed if you work 1 hour a week and get $20. You're employed. And so that's where you come up with this absolutely worthless number of 5% of the world is unemployed. You guys, it's more like a third. And so if you said, how well are we doing? We got a third of them. But that's only 30 hours, but it doesn't mean it's a living wage. So it's not that good a job necessarily. I'm going to go one step further. And this is the one I'm really concerned about, Chad, and I know I've mentioned it to you. But for some reason, human development is slowing. I'll just do the United States, which I know best. There's a word called productivity. I didn't know what it meant because economists use the word differently than I do. It means GDP divided by the total population. And that number since 1960, I'm just doing the United States, has been grinding down, just like this. And so if they said, how are we doing on human development? I would say, for exactly what the world needs, we're grinding down. I wanted to enter, Chad, into your competitiveness forum, and for your number 10, I think you need a real serious benchmark there for this organization and for all the countries in it. And I'm just going to provide that for you, Deborah. This is a gift from Gallup to you. But what we need to know for every country is for people employed, are they engaged at work? One of the reasons they want a job is because a job's a third of the thing you do during the day. You sleep 8 hours, you work 8 hours, the other 8 hours you're a customer. And so if you have a job that's fulfilling and you think you go make a contribution to something, here it is, Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates. It means your life matters. But if when we're not delivering it, it means that your life doesn't matter. Okay, so 8 billion, 5 billion adults, 3 billion of them say, I'm ready for work, and we've only got 1.5 billion jobs. But of those 1.5 billion jobs, here's how many are engaged. So this is from our world poll. It means if this was an audit, it would mean that just 300 million global citizens, and that's a high number, actually have a place where they go to work and feel fulfilled. Deborah, I'm going to call it flourishing, because that's the number. That's the word that those guys that translated best. It translates better to flourishing or thriving than it does to happiness. But the reason this is so important to this organization is that guess where, Chad, the really good ideas come from? And guess, but those are the people that build your organization. Those are also the people that get ideas, and I call them jumpers. They go out and start companies. And that's a good thing. I've had 100 of them. Between Dr. Gallup and myself, 100 companies have jumped out of Gallup. You got to be proud of it. You got to see yourself as a talent machine, as a talent factory. But then, down at the other end, you have actively disengaged. Those are the worst. They hate their company, they hate their boss, and they're troublemakers. That's not just somebody that's moody. Those are actual troublemakers. They go up and down the halls and petition other people to hate the company as much as they do. And for the whole world and for every country, it's about 20% of everybody in the workforce is in a really foul mood. The people in the middle, have you been hearing this thing called quiet quitters? I think maybe Gallup started that in a Wall Street Journal article. I don't know. But they don't really mean any trouble. They're just trying to do as little as they possibly can.
Jim, let me ask you a question, because the question some people have in their rooms, if a lot of companies publish their engagement number. They put it in their annual reports or someplace, and you see numbers 70-80% of engaged, and this number is order of magnitude lower. And my guess is if there's something out of whack here with what companies are reporting and what you're showing here. Any logic on the difference?
Well, that number, Chad, is something that almost all CHROs do. What they do is they say, are you satisfied with your job? And what it is about 20% of them will say they'll give it a 5. It's on a Likert scale, 1 to 5. and then about 60% of them will say a 4. And what most people don't know is it just makes sense to say, well, 4 is almost a 5, isn't it? No, a 4 is almost a 1. And so you shouldn't be adding those. That's something, if you ever get into survey work, 4s aren't 5s in anything. If you have a customer that says, I'm a 4, it means that they're looking around, and it means that they tend to be price shoppers. And I mean, a 5 is this, but that's, ask yourself, how would you feel if your spouse, somebody asks your spouse, how do you rate them on a 1 to 5 and you said a 4? That's kind of the same. That's kind of the same thing with 4s and 5s. But that if you clean the 4s out, Chad, you'll.
So that'd be the 5s, the 21%.
Yeah. But so what we're gonna. I think I'm done here. But what I'm gonna do. So those SDGs that you have, your point number 10, Gallup actually does a lot of those for the United Nations. So, for instance, when you see the hunger report, by the way, hunger's way up, but that's a Gallup fact off of our. So the UN, the United Nations uses the SDG, uses Gallup for their SDGs now. So it'd make a lot of sense if we add for number 10 the percentage of engaged people. Now, so the real ugly news is that's why. Over the next 10 years, competitiveness doesn't look great for the whole world. China is going to be way off with their revenue that they. But this number is very changeable, and so they're very, very big companies. Accenture has 750,000 people. And we put a lot of projects in. We did a whole bunch of stuff there, a whole bunch of treatments. They drove it clear up to 50%. But this is a point, I don't know if I can land it or not, but when you think of competitiveness, we tend to think of it from classic economics. The very origin of competitiveness is a spirit. And in the absence of a spirit is all you have are economic tools, legislation, and policy. And be careful what you wish for if you use all those in the absence of a spirit. But if you said, what's the spirit of competitiveness in the world? That 21% is really, really close. What could we do with it as a group if we went to work? I think we could drive it to 40 or 50%. If we did, I think that would change the world more than anything else. I think this problem is the other global warming. And I think it's more serious than global warming. I don't want to start an argument because this comes to us faster. And that is countries grinding down where sort of all of us are becoming Venezuela. You see what I mean? So we don't have enough economy to support our people. That's why this has to be reversed. But it's very fixable.
So how do you do that? How do you make that 20 or 40? You said Accenture has done some good stuff.
Yeah.
What's the secret?
Maybe one of the most, we have, so we've interviewed 100 million employees. And because they're clients, we have them attached to teams. And so our researchers were able to lift up 400,000 teams and rank order them from very top all the way to bottom. So these are the best teams in the world. And this could be all kinds of companies, car manufacturers and candy and hospitals, all sorts of things, all the way down to basically the lousiest teams in the world. They did them in tranches, so it's not actually 1 to 400,000, but in tranches. I asked our top researcher, what are the top group like? And he said, think of Navy SEALs. They can do jobs that look impossible to us, somehow pull it off. Then down at the other end, you have people that teams that can't complete the simplest tasks. They also get injured and they make mistakes and have defects. Everything goes wrong down there. But anyway, our guy came in, he's scratching his head and he said, we never had anything like this before, because what you're looking for is variance. And so if you're doing a Six Sigma project, speaking of Deming, if you find 4, 5, 6% variation, and you go in and fix that, lean it out, everything gets better. But he said 70%, one phenomenon describes 70% of the variation from great to horrible, and also on here. He said, we never had anything like that. And he said, it's just the manager. And so probably as a civilization of the space and time that we live in, we haven't really understood how important the manager is. And the manager's job's it's got to be about productivity, it's got to be about goals, it's got to be about beating goals, but it also has to do with some kind of maximizing the potential of that person, because Aristotle and Socrates and Plato were right. That's actually what humans want, to grow and develop.
Jim, one of the things you talk about a lot is strengths, and focusing on strengths and not weaknesses. And you convinced me to take your Clifton Strength Index test, which I could say this because you're not paying me, but go online to Gallup and take the Clifton Strengths Index. It takes you about 40 minutes, costs you $50. It'll be the best $50 you ever spend in your life. And the reason is it focuses on your strengths, not your weaknesses. I got my son to do that. He was all kind of depressed because he wasn't getting what he wanted. I said, take this strengths index. You'll find out the 5 things you're best at and just go work on those and forget the weaknesses because it doesn't give you any. And he thanked me. He doesn't thank me for much, but he thanked me for that. Okay, but why do you focus on strengths, not weaknesses? Now I see with your lousy manager, you got to focus on strengths. But why is that so important?
Well, I think it's just an error in management science. And it started back about 50 years ago, but management scientists made a mistake. And we've been living it out. And what they do is they figure out what's wrong with you, and they call it gap. So you have some gaps. Then we put Chad into training, and we work on his weaknesses. What happened, so we had an academic guy that taught college for, it's called Clifton Strengths. It's actually after Don Clifton. My name's Jim Clifton. Don Clifton was an academic who had a hunch that weaknesses never turn into strengths, but strengths grow throughout your whole life in an unlimited way, and that there's no one taxonomy. This is really important, and I think it's one of Gallup's my firm's biggest discoveries. There's no single taxonomy of a great leader, and that's another thing, leadership science, where they've made a mistake. In America, they try to turn us all into Colin Powell or Jack Welch. And I know them. I knew them both. They don't have anything in common. They're both, great guys. They don't have anything in common at all. But if you can figure out your strengths and leverage them, it's amazing how many people can lead and build really big things. But that's probably, America's clear up to about 35%. And so there's 4 million kids I'll make this fast. There's 4 million kids that graduate from high school. 2 million go to JUCOs or don't go, and 2 million go to 4-year colleges. Of the 2 million that go to the 4-year colleges, every freshman year, about half of them, right at 1 million of them, take this thing called StrengthsFinder. So if you go to University of Tennessee like he did, the freshmen this year, 7,000 of them, take a StrengthsFinder, and then they have a board, and they get 5 touches. So it's 2 adults and 1 upperclassman that sits down and takes them through a whole life planning around their strengths. That's been going on for about 6 years, but you see the point? We're doing a pretty good job about educating all these kids in a different way, where we're reversing the way that they've learned before. And I think it's changing America. America's getting pretty close to being a strengths-based nation, which I think will change the world. There's only, there's 125 million full-time jobs, and of those, 55% of them say they can They're kind of like they're jobs like we have, or they're desk jobs. Of those, by the way, 90% of them don't want to come back. 90% of them don't want to come back to work, which makes it even trickier. But that thing hit zero, and I forgot what I was saying. I had a Joe Biden moment.
Well, let me help you here. Don't knock our president when you're out of the country now. Okay. But if you offered to help us with that number 10 on benchmarking, and so I think what you're talking about is this engagement. Give us a feel for engagement around the world, or do you have something else in mind as you were thinking about helping?
No, but I think what we would do is we'd make this one of your benchmark numbers. We ought to propose it to the United Nations to make that an SDG. How many employees in the world are actually fulfilled in their jobs? Mm-hmm. And then everybody that's in the group, I'll have my analysts make them a special report for theirs. In Greece, it's 11. I called it back. It's 11%. But if you said what would shock Greece into, it'd be to double that. Greece could double that number pretty fast if they really went to work on it.
So I know this is out of culture for here, but we're out of time, but we're going to take 2 more minutes, Roberto, if it's okay. Is there a question from the audience you'd like to ask? You've heard some stuff you haven't seen before. Is there something that you'd really like to ask that maybe you think everybody else would care about?
It's pretty close. You might be interested in this. Women, for some reason, make a little better manager than a man, a little bit better, and it might be they're a little bit better at developing people. A very odd thing we found in the United States, because there's so much stress in the workplace right now with people home and all that, managers are more likely to feel sad, anger, depression, burnout, and that sort of a thing. Women can handle it better than men, not by a lot, but by a little bit. In other countries, I was pretty much doing Europe in the West right then. In Africa, by the way, one of the SDGs are women in the workplace that we do for the United Nations too. But that story is not good at all. Women are really being abused in other parts of the world. You can get that. It's online if you want to look at it.
Yeah, great question. One more question.
How is the salary connected with happiness for engagement?
That's quite an argument. But it really makes a difference. I'm just going to give you, so I'm not saying it depends. It really makes a difference up to about 100,000. And so people that are suffering, as you get their income up, it really makes a difference. It gets harder to find once you get up around the bigger numbers. And people that are thriving, which, by the way, I do have a slide here. If anybody wants these slides, I got a whole bunch of them on here, but I'll just send them to you. Jim_Clifton@Gallup.com. But Greece is actually doing pretty well, where most countries are trending down with their thriving. England, France, Germany, Canada, America. Greece is coming up, but when you can get higher pay to the poor people, that's where it really makes a difference. There's one slide on here that shows which of these emotions did you experience yesterday? And basically it's anger. Anger has been rising in a near perfect linear way for 15 years. That's probably why you see all these big populism swings. You know, almost all of Latin America is now swung left. You know, Columbia was the last to go. But it's mainly because not enough good jobs with, I'm going to say, with a living wage. And so what you really want to do is get as many poor people as you can pull out. You don't have to pay them $100,000, but if you can get them a living wage, it really changes the outcome of the mood of a country.
Jim, thank you very much. They're giving us the hook. We're out of time. But thank you, Jim. Wonderful. Nice job.